All right, we have a couple people joining, so we're just gonna wait for a few moments to let Zoom let everyone in, and then we'll get started in a few minutes. So thank you so much everyone for joining today.
Yeah, we're really excited for this event.
And thank you so much, Hetal, for being here today.
Yeah, anytime. I'm happy you guys invited me.
We're super excited for today.
Oh, heads up, before I do have a hard stop at 11:30, just a heads up.
Totally cool. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, welcome to day one of our Powerful Feminine series featuring powerful South Asian women. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Triveni and I'm a junior in the college here at Georgetown majoring in government.
And my name is Maya. I am a junior in the college studying history, and we will be your moderators today. We are so excited to have you join our celebration of the Divine Feminine with our Navarātri speaker series. Please feel free to drop any questions that might come to your mind in the Q&A box, and we will have some time at the end of our discussion to get to them. But today we are joined with Hetal Vasavada.
So Hetal was a contestant on season 6 of Masterchef, and following the show, Hetal started a blog called Milk and Cardamom and has recently published her first cookbook of recipes inspired by Indian cooking. She also consults on recipe development and content creation for culinary businesses. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So our first questions are just kind of a little bit more general. We just wanted to know, when you discovered your passion for cooking and what your culinary journey has been like, and what sparked your decision to make a career change and go from healthcare consulting into, the realm of culinary art.
Yeah. So I always was into cooking, not necessarily because it was a passion, but because it was like a necessary skill I needed to have. I grew up in a joint household. So like when my parents immigrated here, my dad has like 6 brothers and my mom's got 6 sisters and other siblings. My family decided to sponsor them all as well. So they all lived with us at one point in my life. So at any point in my life, I had like 10 to 12 people living in my house with my family. So dinner was obviously like a production. There's always like one person making rotli, one person making the shak, one person prepping things. Like you needed all hands on deck to make sure dinner got done because everyone was working multiple jobs. My family is not, I guess, like the typical South Asian immigrant in the sense that they're not professionals. My dad has a 3rd grade education and my mom has a 10th grade education. My dad worked as a child laborer in India and came over after he paid for his brother to go to pharmacy school, who came first and then sponsored my dad. So they were working, blue collar jobs at factories with like crazy shifts all over the place. So we need to get dinner fast. So my mom would have me in the kitchen fairly early on. I was, either cutting the ends off guar or prepping the lot for the rotli. Like there's always a job I had when I came home from school to get dinner on plates. So it was a necessity, right? It was a skill I needed to have to make the house continuously run smoothly. When I got to college, my parents lost their jobs because of the recession. They were both in the diamond industry at the time. In order to, there's my daughter. What do you want? Okay, I got it.
My name is Imala.
Here you are.
I want my name to be Bella.
Okay. So this is the reality of being a mom, right? They're always going to be like, come in. So when my parents lost their job, I knew I had one skill that I could monetize, and that was cooking. So I worked as a line cook. I was cooking out of my dorm room, selling thalis, doing, what, are you okay? So Root ran out, and it's just me and Laura. This is like the reality. So in order to pay for school, I was line cooking and cooking out of my dorm room. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. Everything's okay. It's dead. You need to charge it. Okay. So I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so I was working as a line cook, selling out of my dorm room, and cooking became a skill that I can monetize and make money and pay for school. So that's what I did. And then it wasn't until I left school that I was like, I kind of miss cooking. Like I missed baking. I missed creating and sharing with others. And then about 5-6 years ago, my husband saw like how miserable I was at my healthcare job and was like, quit. And I had never been in a position financially where I could quit a job. And he's like, oh, it's okay. We'll be okay. Like, I got you. Like, just quit. So I quit and I tried to start a cookie business. And I didn't have enough self-confidence to actually do it. Because like, in order to be a chef, you have to have some sort of ego to be like, other people should pay for my food, right? Like, there's got to be a little bit of ego and self-confidence there. And I just didn't have it. So I tried out for Masterchef to see where I ranked. And after that, I pretty much jumped right into food as a career. After I got off the show, I got some gigs being in the Bay Area, writing recipes for meal kit companies, because that's when like Blue Apron, Plate Joy, all those companies are blowing up. So I was doing recipe writing for like Blue Apron, Plate Joy, a couple other small startups that ended up getting a lot of funding later on. And it just kind of spread from there. There weren't many South Asian recipe developers out there. So I kind of had a nice kind of niche for myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's very cool to see like how you now have your like cookbook, and we know you recently just released your Diwali ebook, which is super cool. So I know you had a New York Times feature article that discussed your like hybridized food in your like your cookbooks. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about blending your Indian heritage with your American upbringing.
I'm sure I think a lot of you can relate, but growing up, I wanted like anything but Indian food for dinner every night. Right? You're like, oh, no dal bhat chakarotli again. I want tacos or I want pasta or whatever. And like the rule in my house was like, if you didn't eat dinner with the family, you had to make your own dinner. So I was always cooking at home, but you also know that Indian moms cannot let things like on the stove, they won't leave it alone. So I'll walk away and my mom's like adding masala to my pasta, or like, oh, it just needs an extra, jiru in my refried beans. And I'm just like, oh my God, Mom, why? But the thing is, it always tasted good, right? Like it always tasted good. It never took it to the point where it wasn't bad. And I think that's something that a lot of like, Indian Americans kind of experience growing up. I'm sure all of us have. But what I noticed is like, I always thought that was something like, God, that's so annoying that my mom keeps adding masala to all my food. Why? Everything doesn't need to be Indianified or like bagar. So when I got older, I noticed there's like this huge amount of people that had the same experience as me, and actually look back and look at those recipes and very much feel a lot of nostalgia, right? Like, eating, and especially when it comes to desserts, right? Like a lot of us, we grew up with cookies and cakes, but we also grew up with like pendas and barfis. We never really had them mashed together growing. I mean, maybe the most like fusion one I saw was like a chocolate penda that my mom would get from like Ahmedabad. But like, these are still very comforting things, and still very much like we get to have both the American and Indian comfort foods all in one. And I kind of really like that aspect of creating dishes that did that for like this whole group of Indian Americans.
Yeah, I don't think I've really ever seen anything that, really mashes South Asian and American cuisines together. So have you, seen or felt any pushback against this combination?
Oh, I did when I was on MasterChef a lot, actually. I had a lot of trolls when I was on MasterChef, where I had a lot of Indian people say I wasn't Indian enough because my khichdi didn't have mug, but I used green lentils instead. And that's because they didn't have mug in like the pantry. Or like a lot of my Indian dishes were a little bit more obviously fusion, and the Indian people would say it's not Indian enough, and the American people would say it's too Indian, right? So if you look on Twitter, it would just be a mix of like, oh, she can't be Masterchef, she cooks too much Indian food, or she can't be Masterchef, her Indian food isn't even Indian. So I definitely got a lot of pushback when I was on the show, but I think between 5 years ago and now, I think one, my generation has grown up, right? We're no longer like in our 20s anymore. We're growing families, we're cooking for others, we're nourishing ourselves and others at this age. And they realize that, you know, these fusion recipes make sense, right? Like, and are familiar to them in like every sense. I also think there's been just a lot more bloggers out there that have been sharing more fusion. You have, you know, Chutney Life, Palak, you have Nisha from Love Laugh Mir, Jill. Like there's so many more Indian fusion savory bloggers out there that are sharing that it's becoming, I think, more of a norm. And then you have Priya with her book, Indianish, right? Like it just became something a little bit more normal.
Yeah, and I know, like you said, it's been starting to get more normal, but when you first started, like for South Asians, I think it's sometimes difficult to accept, like by the community, that this career is not like necessarily like quote unquote conventional. Like, did you face any difficulties in like getting support when you decided to follow this path? And like, how did people react? And like, how did you overcome these obstacles?
So my mom and dad definitely in the beginning were like, we did not come to America for you to like work a labor job, right? Because in their mind, food is a labor job. So another thing is the idea of being in food, people assume that you just work in a restaurant, right? They think that if you're in the food world, the only job there is restaurant. But there are so many jobs. You can be a food stylist, you can be a recipe developer, you can be a test kitchen manager, you can be a cookbook author, a cookbook editor, a recipe editor. There are so many careers within the food industry outside of just being in a restaurant and working grunt work, right? And that is something I have to explain to my parents. I'm like, no, I can make money writing recipes for like Bob's Red Mill for their blog. Like there are other careers, and they slowly, when they realized that, but also as they watched me on MasterChef and saw the passion I had, they were very much supportive of that. Do I still get aunties asking me when I'm going to get a job? All the time. Like, you know, when I go to a family function, someone's like, oh, so are you working now? And, you know, for a long time, it was very much like, are you working now? But I think lately with the features that I've been getting, with the kind of caliber of businesses I've been working with, they've been backing off and realizing that this is something that is like, okay, this is a career. And one last thing before, like, I can't blame my parents in the sense, because like our parents only want stability for us, especially coming from, you know, a low income family. Like the only thing they want for me was financial stability, and the only way they saw that is being by a doctor, engineer, or business person, right? And we don't really have the luxury of a lot of people who can just follow their passions or dreams and like hope it works out. So I totally understood where my parents came from, but I think showing them the proof of like this is a legitimate career and can go somewhere was very important to them.
Yeah, I think one thing that we were talking about when we were preparing this was, wondering what inspires you. And so I think we wanted to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about, how your creative process works and how you come up with new recipes.
Yeah, so I think every recipe writer has a very unique creative process to themselves. For me, it's very much about instigating or inspiring a feeling when you look at one of my dishes or even eat it, right? So what I do is, like, for example, for Holi, I wrote down a list of things I've seen or felt during Holi. You know, you see powders flying in the air. I see, the powders mixing on people's faces. Going to Taco Bell after like a huge Holi fight and you're like in your dirty, Holi clothes. The stark contrast between white and color. So I'll write all of it down. And then I'll write the foods that are normally associated with Holi down, right? Like you normally have kachori, you'll have some mithai, you have, tandai, all that stuff. And then I start trying to making connections of like, how can I then take an American dessert or European dessert that would meld with this really well? And then also, how can I design it in a way that's visually stunning, right? So like my rangoli cake is a good example. I have a rangoli cheesecake that I made for Holi this year. And, you know, during Holi, you have your powders, you make giant rangoli. Usually you have something milky. Tendai has fennel in it. That's one of the main flavors. So I have an orange fennel crust for the cheesecake. So I just kind of build upon that. And then I'll recipe test like 100 times before I get it right and then share it. But a lot of the inspiration is just kind of like my experiences with the seasons or whatever whatever the occasion is, and then translating that into a piece of food, make it tangible.
That is so cool. I've never heard of anybody, you know, being inspired by colors and then turning that into flavor. That is really, really cool. I think we only have time maybe for one more of our questions, and then we were going to go and see if the audience had any questions for you. But I think maybe we'll wrap up with, you know, a final, what's the greatest thing about being a chef?
I think watching other people make your foods in their homes for their celebrations and incorporate your dishes into their traditions. I've had so many people tell me they made gulab jamun cake last year for Diwali, and then a ton of them say that they're making it again this year for Diwali, and that they're going to continue the tradition of making this cake, which there's going to be a whole young generation that's going to grow up, instead of eating regular gulab jamun like we did, they're going to grow up eating gulab jamun cake, and they can then, through my book, because it's, you know, measured out and actually written, they can also recreate that for their kids. So the fact that like my recipes can become family recipes is like a very, I mean, it's very touching to me, and it brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, I know. I can personally say, like, I actually tried making a gulab jamun cake with my mom, and it's like a really fun experience to like hear about like her like how she grew up and like what her mom taught her, and like kind of incorporating like new things that I've learned. And it's like a really fun experience bringing us to like generations together. So now we're going to turn to some questions from the audience. So our first one is, you have been very vocal about folks like taking your intellectual property and ideas from your culinary work and like not giving credit where it's due. Could you give advice to young women who are working in like the entrepreneurial or corporate worlds on how to engage in these conversations and speak up when we've been wronged?
I think 100% know what the rules are. So talk to a lawyer, especially just an IP lawyer in whatever field that you're in. Food IP is very weird. It's very fluid because recipes cannot be copywritten, essentially. There are only certain aspects of it, but really just one, get all the knowledge on what's legal and illegal into your toolbox so you know what your rights are when someone does infringe upon your intellectual property or your trademark, copyright, anything that you've done, so that you can talk to them. Half the time, to be honest, a lot of people who share my recipes or recreate it without credit have no clue what the rules are, you know? And then I'll just talk to them in a voice of an educator, you know, hey, I'm so glad you enjoyed this cake. Would you mind crediting me? I send them a link on like what the rules are typically for food writing. Now, if they're selling the cake, then yes, and they don't credit, I do send cease and desists, because it is my business. I worked hard on that. I spent hours, weeks on that cookbook, and see someone profit off of my hard work, unless they're profit sharing with me, I'm not okay with that, you know? And like, I think none of you guys should be okay with that. It's really hard because they'll always come back with like, well, I'm a South Asian entrepreneur too, and I'm just trying to make it work. I'm like, that's great. I'm all for like South Asian women building businesses, but not off the backs of others. There's more than enough desserts out there for you to create. More than enough. Like, food is such a infinite art medium that you can create so much with it. You don't need to take someone else's creativity to do it. So I think protect yourself and don't feel like you're being like an asshole for protecting yourself, because the other half, they're just going to be just like, it's also asshole behavior on their end too. Because a lot of us, we want to be the proper, kind, nice, oh, it's okay. Oh, it's just, she's just baking out of her house. No, not okay. You let one thing slip, people will take advantage of it. And don't allow that to occur. You're not being mean, you're just being protective.
So our next question has a little bit more to do with Navarātri. And so it's, what culinary inspiration do you draw from Navarātri, and what life inspiration, if any?
Oh man. So Navarātri, I grew up in Jersey, where like Garba is like a month-long like party. Every weekend I was out Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If there were some places with Sunday Garbas till like 2 a.m. with like my friends. I remember as a kid falling asleep in between the bleachers at like the gymnasiums with like the music blaring. A lot of my Navarātri things aren't inspired by the occasion, but more so the experience of like going to Garba, and like there's always one auntie that sold papri nulot. And I'm like, oh yeah, I got to make papri nulot for Navarātri. I got to put that recipe up. Or the colors and brightness that occurs during Navarātri, really including, there's my husband.
Or the uncles outside in the parking lot drinking.
Yeah, the whiskey uncles drinking. But incorporating all those kind of experiences within my desserts. For this year, for Diwali, I actually kind of mashed Navratri and Diwali together, since they're all kind of within the same amount of time. But I have a Kesar Pista cream puff that's in my Diwali ebook. And if you look at it, it has like a marbled, bright cracklin, which is like a brown sugar crust. And all those colors were inspired by like one of my Garba Janya jolis that I have. But I really like, it's more the experience and the visual stuff versus the things I've eaten for the most part.
Got it. That's super cool. So our next question is, what is one of your first memories of food that you think like you hold really close to your heart and has inspired you to this day?
It would be doing a rotli dance with my boss. So when I was very, very little, my mom's mom lived with us, and she's like the sweetest person alive. And she brought me, when she came from India, she brought me a little velan and patli so I could roll out my own rotis. And I would make my baby rotli, and she would put it on the tawa. And whenever she'd make rotli, what I would do is I would play with her sari and like dance until like the bread would bubble up, and then she'd like look at me. She's like ready to flip it, and we'd flip it. But I remember like playing in her saris and like the smell of her saris, and her laughing at me because I was being such a doofus. And I'd just like be like, rotli bubbles, because she would tell me that you don't flip until the bubbles come on the rotli, right? So that's a good one. That, and then her making me stir kadhi. She'd like set me up on the chair, and then she'd be like, okay, keep stirring it, don't stop, keep stirring it, don't stop. So the kadhi wouldn't scorch.
Go ahead, Trish.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So our last question for today is pertaining to like college students. So today we're joined by college students from Georgetown, Yale, Princeton, and other DMV area schools. And we're wondering, do you have any advice for college students that are listening today?
Yes. Okay. If you have any sort of passion, 100% turn it into a side hustle now. Don't wait like I did. If you want to be in food, start staging. Staging is essentially interning at a restaurant. Just ask them, can I stage? And you learn a skill. So I would stage at like a pastry restaurant to learn how to make pie crusts. And you work for free. It's up to you on your hours. It's like interning for free. So if you're interested in something that maybe isn't a part of your major, reach out to businesses that are in that field and say, hey, can I do a couple hours with you? And that's it. So at least you have a general idea of what it takes. Because you guys are young. I mean, some of us like are not lucky in the sense that we can make a full-time career of our passion, right? So if you can get an idea now of what it takes to make that occur, you can start working towards it. And then if you realize like, oh, maybe not like restaurant, like I had one person that was finished culinary school, externed with me in my bakery, and 2 days in was like, maybe this is not the life for me after culinary school. And I was like, okay, well, let's sit down and figure out what you can do with the degree you have now. So do it now, get the experience now, reach out to folks, and network. Oh my God, network. Networking is everything. Networking is the only reason why I got the article in New York Times, why I got the Bon Appetit articles, why I got anything, to be honest. Network, meet all the right people, talk, keep in touch, chat with them on Instagram. Like, honestly, it will do wonders for you. I'll tell you a quick story before I go. I met Priya Krishna via Instagram like 3 years ago. I was just a fan of her and her writing at the time. And I was like, you know, she put up a thing like, oh, does anyone have a good yogurt story? I'm like, oh, I do. Let me just, you know, DM it to her. She includes like literally 2 sentences from a 5-minute phone call into a New York Times article. She ended up writing her book. She came here to San Francisco for a media event, which was happened to be at San Francisco Cooking School, which is the school I applied to, got into, but couldn't afford. But I kept in touch with the founder and would give her updates every once in a while on what I was doing. She was like, oh, why don't you come? I got an early copy of my cookbook. I made some muggas. I brought that with me. I was like, here, Priya. Turns out the dessert that the students were making for the dinner failed. So we ended up serving my dessert to everyone at that table, which was like owners of PR companies, owners of massive restaurants in San Francisco, including Priya. Priya, without telling me, pitched my book to New York Times then and wrote the article. She then introduced me to Sonia Chopra, who was at the time writing at, who was the editor at Eater, and Khushbu Shah, who was a writer at Thrillist. Now, Khushbu Shah is a restaurant editor at Food and Wine. I have a 10-page feature in Food and Wine next month that's coming out. I didn't even ask. It was just networking. Sonia Chopra, she is now the executive editor of Bon Appetit, and I'm writing for Bon Appetit now as well. So honestly, network, keep in touch, don't burn bridges. I mean, during Diwali last year, I mailed out Khushbu, Sonia, all the Indian food writers that I had become friends with on Instagram, including bloggers. I mailed them all like Banda Bark and was like, hey, happy Diwali. You never know. You never know. If you see talent, you know, the other thing is don't ask. Don't ask like, hey, can you write about me? Can you do this for me? Just be a genuine friend, become a genuine, like have a genuine connection with them, and they'll do it on their own, honestly. Friends will always root for you.
And start Rogaine early.
Oh my God, Root.
Well, that's awesome to hear. And we really appreciate hearing your advice and for you joining us today. And thank you to everyone who is in the audience and is here to celebrate Hetal's wonderful achievements and here to shine a light on all the powerful South Asian women that we have featured in the speaker series.
Thank you guys for having me. If any of you guys have any more questions, anything, you can DM me at Milk and Cardamom. I'm always happy to answer. But thank you for having me. Happy Navarātri.
Happy Navarātri. And I know we couldn't answer all the questions today, but we'll be sure to get back to you all over email if we weren't able to. And Maya, I don't know if you want to just take away the rest.
You know, just please tune in tomorrow, I guess, from 4 to 4:30 through the same Zoom link to hear Professor Joshi, a celebrated microeconomist and one of Georgetown's very own professors. But for now, thank you so much for coming in, Hetal, and thank you to everybody in the audience for being so wonderful and sending in your questions.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Hetal.